Snowfall blurred the horizon into a seamless sheet of white, swallowing the ridges and forests until the land looked like the blank canvas of a forgotten world. The wind carried a brutal bite, snapping at exposed metal joints and hissing through the gaps in armored plating. Troop carriers stood in a staggered line, their treads half buried in frost, exhaust spilling out in slow, steamy plumes. Shadows moved between them, soldiers draped in white-patterned ghillie suits, rifles held ready but steady, like they were part of the landscape itself. Commander Kalen Vay stood at the center of it all, unmoving against the cold. His armor, black with sharp silver inlays, drank in the gray daylight, the hood of his environmental cowl drawn low over a masked face. The mask's thin slit revealed no more than the glint of his eyes, but the soldiers kept their distance regardless. He had no need to shout orders. His presence carried the weight of authority like a physical field, a force shaped from decades of unbroken service. He scanned the tree line beyond the patrol perimeter. Imperial beacons pulsed in the snow, marking the sweep zone. This region was supposed to be clear, a route mapped and secured last rotation. Yet intelligence insisted a resistance cell had moved back in, using the forest as a shield. Kalen believed it. The humans native to this sector had a knack for vanishing in terrain others found hostile. A faint crack in the stillness, one brittle branch snapping under weight, brought Kalen's gaze to the left ridge. It was far, a good 100 meters off, but his optics adjusted instantly. A figure moved there, faint under the mottled whites and grays. Not one of his. Left flank, he said into his comm, voice low, precise. 3 armored soldiers broke from the line, advancing in a wide arc. The shot came before they'd crossed 20 meters. A sharp, flat sound that didn't echo. Resistance work, silenced but deadly. One of his soldiers fell sideways into the snow. Kalen had already moved, pivoting with his rifle raised, but no second shot came. The forest stirred instead, shadows dislodging themselves from the trees. The ambush was surgical. Fire sparked along the ridge from multiple points, each muzzle flash barely visible before it was smothered by the falling snow. Kalen's troops dropped to one knee, returning fire with controlled bursts. Ghillie-suited Imperials vanished into the terrain, flanking around without waiting for direction. Kalen advanced, his movements sharp but never hurried, the rifle steady in his hands. He saw the first resistance fighter go down, slender build, human, armor mismatched and patched. Another darted between trees and took a shot at Kalen. The round sparked against his shoulder plate, glancing away. He fired once in reply, a clean hit through the man's weapon arm. The fighter fell back, clutching the injury, vanishing behind cover. But it wasn't random shooting. The resistance wasn't trying to win here. They were drawing attention, creating chaos, which meant someone important was in the mix. Kalen quickened his pace, following the subtle shift in their formation. The snow muted his steps, but his breath clouded in sharp bursts inside his mask. Through the crosshairs, he caught sight of a man moving differently than the rest. Measured steps, scanning even as the battle raged, as though calculating. His armor was heavier than the others, scarred in multiple places. His helmet was missing, revealing dark hair matted with frost, eyes narrowed against the cold. He carried no rifle now, only a combat knife, and he wasn't running to escape. He was steering, guiding his comrades' retreat. Kalen broke from a main push, circling wide to cut him off. The man didn't see him until the commander was less than 10 meters away. By then, Kalen had already drawn his sidearm. "On your knees," Kalen ordered. The man froze. The snow around them seemed to still, the sounds of battle dampening as the fight moved deeper into the trees. Slowly, the man dropped to one knee, the knife still in his hand but lowered. His gaze locked on Kalen's mask without flinching. "You're far from your capital, Commander," the man said, his voice rough but level. "And you're far from safety," Kalen replied. The man smiled faintly. "Safety's an illusion." Kalen moved forward, closing the gap in 2 deliberate steps. His left hand shot out, seizing the man by the throat and lifting him upright. The weight was nothing. Kalen's armor compensated with hydraulic precision. The man's breath frosted against the black of the commander's mask. It was then Kalen noticed the damage in the man's back armor, a jagged tear where a plate had been ripped away. Underneath, along the curve of the spine, skin showed through. Not just skin, etched, burned, and faintly glowing, a lattice of symbols and numbers that pulsed with a subtle inner light. Coordinates. He recognized the structure instantly, a navigational sequence, though unlike any military code he had seen. The man's voice was quiet but clear. "You found your map." Kalen's grip tightened slightly, not enough to crush, but enough to silence further talk. His visor recorded the markings, transmitting the feed directly to his command unit. Data pings returned almost immediately from the analysis AI. Unknown origin, no matches in Imperial or Resistance archives. The glow was faintly bioreactive, responding to the man's pulse. Kalen's instincts prickled. This wasn't a random fighter. Whatever those coordinates were, they were important enough for the Resistance to throw lives into protecting him. Two Imperial soldiers emerged from the tree line, rifles trained. One of them hesitated upon seeing the markings, glancing at the commander for orders. "Bind him," Kalen said, releasing his hold. The man dropped to his knees in the snow, still wearing that faint, maddening half-smile. The soldiers moved in, securing his wrists with magnetic cuffs. As they hauled him upright, Kalen kept his eyes on the exposed markings. They were already fading in intensity, like a beacon dimming when unobserved. The rest of the skirmish had died down. The Resistance fighters were either dead or had vanished back into the forest. Snow began covering the crimson stains on the ground, erasing the traces of what had happened. Kalen turned toward the line of carriers, his captive between two guards. The man spoke again, his voice carrying in the stillness. "You can follow them, Commander. You can reach the end of the map, but you won't like what you find there." Kalen didn't respond. He didn't break stride, but his mind was already moving, weighing possibilities, calculating risks. Whatever this man was, whatever those coordinates led to, it was no longer just another mission. As they approached the nearest carrier, the wind picked up, driving flurries across the ground. Kalen took one last look at the forest beyond, its frozen silence unbroken once more. The mission had changed. The war here was just a thread in a much larger weave, and he had just pulled it loose. The carrier door sealed behind them with a hydraulic hiss. Inside, the heat felt almost alien after the sharp cold outside. The prisoner sat across from Kalen, cuffs locked to a wall bracket. His gaze never dropped, never wandered. "I'm Reaper," he said simply, as if the name explained everything. Kalen regarded him in silence. A name was only as important as the history it carried, and Kalen intended to find out exactly what history came with this one. Outside, engines rumbled to life, and the carriers began their slow, deliberate trek back toward the Imperial outpost. Somewhere deep in Kalen's mind, a question had rooted itself. Not what the coordinates were, but why they had been carved into a human's flesh like a living vault. The answer would come, and when it did, the galaxy might not be the same. The carrier's interior swayed with the uneven terrain, every jolt rattling against the armor plates. Heat vents hissed softly, filling the compartment with recycled warmth that carried the faint tang of metal and oil. Kalen sat motionless on the bench, his gloved hands resting loosely on his knees, eyes locked on the man shackled across from him. Reaper hadn't moved since introducing himself. His gaze was fixed, his posture relaxed in a way that felt deliberate, calculated. The two guards flanking him stood at attention, rifles slung but ready. They stole occasional glances at the markings still faintly visible through the tear in Reaper's armor, though the glow was now so dim it could have been a trick of the light. Kalen had reviewed the scan feed twice during the ride, replaying the moment the numbers pulsed with life. There was no doubt they were coordinates, but the style of notation and the layered structure were unlike any chart in the Imperial Registry. When the convoy reached the outpost, the storm had thickened. The compound's perimeter lights cast hazy cones into the snow, making the air seem heavy with drifting ash. Soldiers moved quickly between structures, their heads bowed against the wind. The carriers entered a hangar, the massive doors sliding shut behind them with a resonant clang. Kalen rose, signaling the guards to bring Reaper. The prisoner didn't resist. His steps were steady, measured, as though he knew exactly where this was leading. They moved through the sterile corridors of the command wing, the sound of boots on metal echoing sharply. Inside the secure interrogation chamber, Kalen dismissed the guards. The door sealed, locking them into the quiet hum of surveillance equipment. A table sat at the center, flanked by 2 chairs. Reaper took one without being asked. Kalen remained standing. "You're going to tell me where those coordinates lead," Kalen said. "I might," Reaper replied, his tone almost conversational. "But then again, I might not." Kalen leaned forward slightly. "You understand that your life is not a bargaining chip here. If you think the Empire will trade for you." Reaper's faint smile deepened. "I'm not asking for a trade. I'm offering a warning." The words hung in the air. Kalen studied him for signs of deception, twitches, shifts in posture, micro-expressions. There were none. Reaper's stillness was unnerving, as if every movement he made was purposeful. "What exactly am I supposed to be warned about?" Kalen asked. "That the end of those coordinates isn't a place you want your empire to reach," Reaper said. His eyes narrowed slightly. "It's not a treasure. It's not a weapon you can tame. It's a door. And once it's open, it won't close." Kalen's mask concealed his reaction, but his mind was already dissecting the claim. Resistance fighters often cloaked information in drama, but this felt different. The specificity of the coordinates, the visible burn into his flesh, none of it aligned with the usual tactics. He activated the wall console. The chamber lights dimmed as a projection bloomed into the air between them, displaying a rotating star map. At its center, a red marker pulsed, an incomplete translation of the coordinates. Several sections remained obscured by interference. "Our analysts say it's somewhere beyond the mapped edges of the Perseid expanse," Kalen said, "far outside regular travel lanes. No recorded colonies, no trade posts, no beacons. If it's empty space, why embed it into you?" Reaper leaned forward, the cuffs clinking softly against the table's edge. "Because empty space doesn't stay empty forever. Someone left something there a long time ago, and now both our sides want to find it. The difference is, my people know it's better left buried." Kalen circled the table, coming to stand behind him. "If it's as dangerous as you say, why bring it into the open? Why let yourself be caught?" "That," Reaper said, "is assuming I didn't want to be caught." Kalen stilled. The implications were deliberate, calculated to provoke thought. He hated the admission that they succeeded. The console chimed with a new report. A medtech's voice came through the comm. "Commander, we completed the deep scan. The etching isn't ink or pigment. It's cellular restructuring. Nanite work, extremely precise. We've never seen this format before. The sequence reacts to bioelectric patterns. His heartbeat is the trigger. Send a full file to my terminal," Kalen said, cutting the channel. Reaper's eyes tracked him as he moved back into view. "So now you know. It's not just information. It's alive in a way. You can't remove it without killing me, and killing me without understanding it. Well, that might be worse." Kalen considered the possibilities. Extraction through force would risk destroying the data. Extraction through cooperation would mean trusting a man who had every reason to mislead him. "You assume I'm going to keep you alive," Kalen said. "You will," Reaper answered simply. "Because now you're curious. And that's how it begins." The chamber door opened, admitting Lieutenant Aran, Kalen's second-in-command. She saluted briskly, her expression taut. "Sir, Central Command has reviewed your field report. They're ordering immediate transport of the prisoner to Sector Headquarters. They want the coordinates analyzed there." Kalen's jaw tightened behind a mask. The urge to comply was ingrained, drilled into him through years of unbroken service. But the thought of handing Reaper over felt wrong, not out of sympathy, but because control of the situation would slip from his hands. "Prepare the transport," Kalen said. Aran nodded and left. Reaper studied him in silence for a moment. "You're not going to do it," he said finally, "because you already know what will happen. They'll strip me apart, and they'll open the door, and you'll have been the one who handed them the key." Kalen didn't respond. His mind was moving too fast, weighing chain of command against the dangerous pull of his own instinct. The Empire valued loyalty, but it also valued results. If there was something at those coordinates that could shift the balance of the war, he needed to be the one to find it. The chamber lights brightened again. Outside, the storm's howl had faded to a dull murmur against the structure. Time was moving, the opportunity narrowing. He stepped closer to the table, lowering his voice. "If I were to investigate this myself, what would I find?" Reaper's expression didn't change. "That depends on how much you're willing to lose along the way." The answer was infuriating in its vagueness. Yet something in the way it was delivered made Kalen certain it wasn't empty rhetoric. A chime from his private comm broke the silence. The incoming ID belonged to an old contact in naval intelligence, one who rarely called without reason. Kalen moved to the corner of the chamber to take it privately. "Commander Vey," the voice said without preamble, "we intercepted chatter from resistance channels before your skirmish. They were guarding the man you captured. Some of the phrases match old myth code references, ones we thought were propaganda. If those coordinates are real, they're tied to something the humans call the Veil Forge. No concrete data, but all accounts describe it as decisive. In the wrong hands, catastrophic." Kalen ended the call without acknowledging the weight settling in his chest. When he turned back, Reaper was watching him, as though he had somehow heard every word. "You see it now," he said quietly. Kalen walked to the console and keyed in a lockdown protocol for the chamber. Outside access would be suspended for the next hour. "You're not going to headquarters," Kalen said. "Not yet." Reaper's smirk faded, replaced by something sharper, an appraisal. "Then you've just made your first dangerous choice." Kalen didn't answer. He didn't need to. The decision had been made the moment he saw those coordinates burning beneath the man's skin. The path forward was no longer about orders. It was about finding the truth before anyone else could claim it. And whatever lay at the end of that map, he was going to see it with his own eyes. The decision to leave the outpost was made in silence, stitched together through a series of subtle movements and orders that, to an outsider, might have seemed routine. Kalen knew the only way to keep Reaper out of Central Command's grasp was to move before the next transmission window. Delays would bring questions, and questions would bring scrutiny. In the hangar, shadows clung to the corners while maintenance crews worked on half-lit machines. The storm had tapered to a whisper, snow drifting like fine dust in the air. Kalen stood beside a compact reconnaissance vessel, its black hull swallowing the light. It was built for stealth and speed, outfitted with a jump drive meant to navigate treacherous hyperspace lanes. Lieutenant Aren approached, her expression unreadable under the visor. "Crews prepped," she said. 2 pilots, 1 tech, minimal life support stores. Enough for a week, maybe more if rationed. "Good," Kalen replied. He didn't explain. She didn't ask. Reaper was brought in under guard, his wrists still bound, though Kalen had ordered the magnetic cuffs swapped for reinforced restraints that allowed some movement. He climbed aboard without comment, his eyes sweeping the vessel's interior as though cataloging every bolt. The hatch sealed, shutting out the hangar's muted clamor. Kalen moved to the cockpit, settling into the command seat while Aren took her station beside him. The pilots initiated launch protocols, the vessel lifting smoothly into the pale, cloud-streaked sky. Within minutes, the outpost was a dark smudge swallowed by distance. "Coordinates locked," the navigation officer reported. "Destination is off-chart. Minimal data on the region. Hyperspace drift patterns unpredictable. That's why we have a pilot," Kalen said. "Engage jump when ready." The ship's engines deepened in pitch, the hum filling the narrow corridors. Kalen could feel the faint vibration under his boots, a reminder of the immense forces aligning just beyond the hull. Reaper sat in the main cabin, secured to a crash seat. The restraints kept him in place, but his posture suggested ease rather than confinement. Kalen joined him once they were in hyperspace, the blue-white tunnel of stretched starlight casting shifting light across their faces. "You're quiet," Kalen said. "I'm watching," Reaper answered. You can learn a lot from how people prepare for things they don't understand. Kalen regarded him. You've been to these coordinates before. No, Reaper said, but I've been close enough to hear the echoes. Echoes of what? You'll see. The conversation ended there, not because Kalen dismissed it, but because the way Reaper's eyes held his suggested the rest was not for words. Hours passed in the steady hum of travel. The tech officer monitored system readouts, occasionally glancing at the prisoner. Erin maintained a silent vigilance from her station, her gaze flicking between Kalen and the NAV display. It was in the 5th hour that the first anomaly hit. The ship lurched, alarms chirping in sharp bursts. Gravitational shear, the pilot called out. Something's warping the corridor ahead. Kalen moved to the cockpit. The view screen rippled with distortions, the hyperspace tunnel bending unnaturally. Readouts spiked, showing gravity wells where none should exist. Stabilize the drive, Kalen ordered. The ship shuddered again, and then, just as abruptly as it began, the turbulence ceased. The tunnel smoothed, but the NAV display now showed a faint shadow trailing their vector. Another vessel? Kalen asked. The pilot hesitated. Not on sensors, but there's a signature. Faint. No transponder, no heat trace. Almost like they don't want to be found, Kalen finished. When he returned to the cabin, Reaper was smiling faintly. They've noticed you, he said. Ooh, you'll find out if they catch up. Try not to let them. Kalen didn't appreciate the cryptic tone, but the truth was unavoidable. Someone was following them. Whether it was Imperial pursuit or something else was unclear, and both possibilities carried danger. The vessel continued, slipping deeper into unmapped space. Stars thinned outside the hyperspace veil, replaced by a strange, dim light that seemed to come from no source at all. Kalen sat across from Reaper again. Tell me about the Veil Forge. Reaper's gaze sharpened. So you've heard the name? I've heard whispers, Kalen admitted. Old myth code and resistance chatter. They call it decisive. They call it catastrophic. Both are true, Reaper said. The forge was built before your empire or my people learned to crawl through the stars. It makes things, or unmakes them, entire systems. It doesn't care who's asking or why. It just obeys. Obeys what? The coordinates. Kalen considered this, weighing the layers of danger in the statement. A weapon, a machine, or something else entirely. The distinction might not matter if the effect was the same. The ship jolted again, not from turbulence, but from a deliberate maneuver. The pilot's voice cut in over comms. Evasive pattern. The shadows closing in. Vector intercept in 2 minutes. Kalen moved to the cockpit in time to see the distortion on sensor swell. It was closer now, a faint ripple in space like a heat haze, drawing nearer with impossible speed. Can we outrun it? Kalen asked. If we push the drive past tolerance, maybe, the pilot said. Do it, Kalen ordered. The deck vibrated under the strain, the hum of the engines climbing into a sharp whine. The shadow hung back for a moment, then fell away, vanishing into the static of hyperspace. Kalen exhaled slowly. Maintain course. No more deviations unless I say. When he returned to the cabin, Reaper's expression was unreadable. That was just the first warning, he said. From whom? From whatever doesn't want us near the forge. The remainder of the journey passed under a taut silence. The crew kept to their stations, the narrow corridors filled only with the sound of machinery and the occasional status check. Kalen reviewed the coordinate data repeatedly, but each time it felt incomplete, as though some essential piece was withheld. As the jump cycle neared completion, the lights in the cabin dimmed automatically. The NAV officer's voice carried from the cockpit, dropping to real space in 30 seconds. Kalen strapped in. Across from him, Reaper leaned back, eyes closing briefly as if bracing for impact. The shift was abrupt. Light folded in on itself. The tunnel collapsed, and stars snapped into clarity. But the space they emerged into was unlike any Kalen had seen. A dead star loomed ahead, its surface fractured and pitted, wrapped in the faint glow of an ancient energy field. Orbiting, it was a structure vast enough to dwarf a fleet. A ring-shaped station, its surface scarred by time, yet still intact. By the Emperor, Arin's voice was barely a whisper. Reaper opened his eyes and smiled faintly. Welcome to the forge. The ship coasted closer, sensors struggling to map the station's surface. Power signatures pulsed in irregular rhythms, neither fully active nor dormant. The architecture was alien in every sense, angles and curves that seemed to shift subtly when not directly observed. Kalen stood, moving to the forward viewport. The scale of it was staggering. This was no myth. It was a truth too large to have been hidden so long. Behind him, Reaper's voice cut through the moment. Now you understand why I let you catch me. Kalen turned. Because you needed someone who could get you here. Because I needed someone who might choose the right thing when it matters, Reaper said. Kalen studied him for a long moment, the weight of the journey settling like frost in his thoughts. The station waited, silent and patient, as though it had been expecting them all along. Prepare for docking, Kalen ordered. The crew moved without hesitation, the vessel aligning with a yawning port along the station's outer ring. Lights flickered faintly in the docking corridor, inviting or warning. It was impossible to tell. As the clamps engaged and the airlock cycled, Kalen knew the choice he had made back at the outpost was only the first. What lay ahead would demand another. And this time, the cost would not be measured in orders disobeyed, but in survival itself. The docking corridor exhaled a faint hiss as the ship's airlock disengaged. Cold air bled in, tasting faintly of iron and ozone. Kalen was the first to step onto the station, his boots clicking softly against a surface that seemed neither metal nor stone, but something in between, smooth yet oddly warm. Lights pulsed faintly beneath the floor like a heartbeat, dim and slow, as though the forge itself were rousing from a long sleep. Reaper followed, his movements measured, his gaze sweeping the corridor's towering walls. The scale was disorienting. Even a narrow passage felt large enough to accommodate a small freighter. Arin and the two pilots trailed behind, weapons ready though the silence offered no immediate threat. The air was still, carrying no dust, no scent of decay. It was the stillness of a place untouched for centuries, perhaps millennia. Where's the control hub? Kalen asked. His voice echoed, warped slightly by the strange acoustics. Reaper inclined his head toward a spiraling ramp ahead. Up there. But the forge isn't like your ships. It won't respond to just anyone. You mean it won't respond to me? Kalen said. I mean it won't respond to the wrong question, Reaper replied. It doesn't take orders. It fulfills intentions. They climbed, the ramp curving around the inner wall. As they ascended, Kalen noticed subtle changes, patterns etched into the surface, flowing like script but shifting when glanced at directly. They resembled known language, yet something in them tugged at the edge of comprehension, like a dream half remembered. The ramp opened into a vast chamber at the station's heart. A circular platform dominated the center, suspended over a deep chasm lit by a faint, swirling glow. Overhead, a lattice of alien machinery pulsed with slow, rhythmic light. At the platform's edge stood a structure resembling a console, though no visible controls marked its surface. This is it, Reaper said. His voice had dropped, not out of fear, but respect. Kalen approached the console, studying its shifting surface. How does it work? You stand there, Reaper said, pointing to the center of the platform. You think of what you want made real. And if the forge agrees, it becomes reality. Arin stepped closer, suspicion etched in her stance. And if it doesn't agree? Reaper's expression darkened. Then you cease to matter. Kalen looked at the glow below, feeling its pull. The hum of the station resonated faintly in his chest, as though it recognized him. Yet before he could move forward, the air in the chamber shifted. A faint tremor ran through the platform. They're here, Reaper said. From the shadows at the far end, shapes emerged, sleek, angular forms of armor the color of burnished obsidian. 6 figures advanced in precise formation, weapons held low but ready. Their visors reflected the forge's faint light, giving them eyeless, inhuman faces. Kalen recognized the design, Imperial Shadow Guard. They'd followed him through the anomalies, through hyperspace, into the very heart of the forge. The lead guard's voice came through a modulated filter. "Commander Kalen, step away from the prisoner." Kalen did not move. "You're out of your jurisdiction, Shadow." "This place belongs to the Empire," the guard replied. "And so does the key." His visor turned toward Reaper. Reaper's voice was almost amused. "I told you someone didn't want us here." The guards fanned out, two flanking the ramp, the others advancing toward the platform. Kalen's hand went to his sidearm, but Reaper stepped forward. "If you kill us here, the forge closes for another 1,000 years. You'll have nothing." The lead guard hesitated, then lifted his rifle. "We'll take our chances." Before the trigger could be pulled, the platform flared with sudden light. The glow from the chasm surged upward, a column of pale fire enveloping the chamber. The guards froze, their visors reflecting the blinding brilliance. Kalen shielded his eyes, but through the glare, he saw the patterns on the console's surface align, forming a single unbroken spiral. The forge had awakened. A voice, not sound but thought, brushed Kalen's mind. "Who calls me?" Kalen's breath caught. He had no words, only the clarity of what he had come for, a weapon to end the Empire's wars before they consumed every star. Yet even as the thought formed, he felt the forge weighing it, sifting intent from desire. The shadow guards reacted first, firing into the glow. The bolts dissolved before reaching the console. Reaper stepped into the spiral, his restraints falling away like sand. He looked at Kalen. "This is where you decide what you really are." Kalen hesitated, the hum of the forge deepening. He thought of the Empire, of its cold machinery of conquest. He thought of the resistance, fragmented and desperate, and he thought of what it would mean to hold the power to end all of it, what it would cost. The guards advanced again, forcing Aren and the pilots into cover. Weapons fire lit the chamber in strobing bursts. Reaper turned toward the console, his hand hovering above it. "If you won't choose, I will," he said. Kalen's instinct screamed. He lunged forward, catching Reaper's arm. Their eyes locked, Kalen's burning with urgency, Reaper's steady and unreadable. "You'd risk everything," Kalen said. "I'd risk nothing," Reaper replied. This was never about survival. It was about ending the cycle. The forge's voice pulsed in Kalen's mind again. "Choose." Kalen let go of Reaper's arm and stepped into the spiral himself. The glow rose around him, wrapping him in weightless heat. His thoughts expanded, touching the edges of something vast. He saw star systems like grains of sand, fleets like motes of dust. And he saw the Empire as a fragile thread in an endless web. His decision was not a word, but a shape, an intention. The forge accepted it. The light collapsed inward, flooding the console. A shockwave rippled through the chamber, throwing the shadow guards back. Their weapons vanished from their hands, dissolving into particles. The ramp sealed behind them, cutting off escape. When the brilliance faded, the chamber was still. The guards lay unconscious. Aren stood frozen, her weapon lowered, eyes locked on Kalen. Reaper stepped closer, studying him. "What did you ask for?" Kalen looked at the console, now dim once more. Not victory, not destruction, balance. Reaper's expression shifted, something between surprise and understanding. "You might be the first to leave here with the forge's blessing." The glow from the chasm faded to a faint shimmer. The heartbeat beneath the floor slowed, as though the station were sinking back into slumber. Kalen knew they had only minutes before the Empire sent more than a handful of guards. "We're leaving," he said. They moved quickly, retracing their steps down the ramp. The unconscious guard were left where they lay. The forge had stripped them of threat. As they neared the docking corridor, the station's lights dimmed further, receding into darkness. Back aboard the ship, the hatch sealed and the engines rumbled to life. Kalen stood in the cockpit as the pilots disengaged from the docking port. Outside, the forge hung in the shadow of the dead star, silent and immense. Reaper stood beside him. "It will sleep now," he said, "until someone else finds the coordinates." "Then we make sure they don't," Kalen replied. Hyperspace stretched out ahead, the stars pulling into lines. The ship leapt forward, leaving the forge behind. Yet Kalen felt its presence still, a weight in his thoughts, a reminder of the choice he had made. Aren glanced at him from her station. You're going to have to explain this to Command. I'm going to have to explain it to myself first, Kalen said. Reaper's faint smile was unreadable. And that's where the real war begins. The stars folded around them, and the forge was gone. But Kalen knew the ripples of this moment would travel far, touching places neither the Empire nor the Resistance could yet imagine. The journey ahead would be dangerous, perhaps impossible. Yet for the first time in years, the path felt like one worth walking. And somewhere, in the dark between the stars, the forge waited for the next question.